Welcome. Welcome to the September Citizens Climate Lobby call. My name is Mark Reynolds. I'm a member of the CCL board and I'm hosting today's call. Let me make a pitch for those of you who don't join the call 10 minutes earlier when the video starts. You'll find out amazing things about the Inflation Reduction Act, like it's longer than Harry Potter books. I did not know this, but now I do. I'm kind of excited about that. Also, there was a rigorous debate in the chat about what we were actually attending. Was it a call? Was it a webinar? So you missed out on all that if you don't come in early. I also want to especially welcome those of you who are new. So let's say maybe you're from the Tulsa chapter that started recently, or the 2 new chapters in Uganda, or maybe you're just new to a chapter. One of the things you're going to hear from our guest speaker, Hahrie Han, is the term radical hospitality during the call. One of the things that Dr. Han does is she studies why social movements succeed or don't. And one of the things that she's done consistently for us over the years is to name something we've been working on. So we've always wanted to be an organization that practiced radical hospitality, but she had a way of naming it so it becomes more obvious to us. You know, there's a tradition in the Old Testament, the way you create something is by naming it. So we're thrilled to have Dr. Han back again. I'll be introducing her in just a moment. Because of her schedule with her family, we had to pre-record. So 2 weeks ago, our director, Madeline Perry, and I recorded the session. I think you're going to be really interested and excited to hear what you hear. After that, we'll go over some of the things that happened since last month's call. Oh, by the way, the biggest climate bill in the history of the planet. So some people talk about the IRA being the biggest climate bill in the history of the US. It's the biggest climate bill in the history of the planet. So congratulations to everybody. That's a really big deal. Then we'll go over some of the things that you can do this month. I really love the options that are available this month. And then the last thing today is last week, my friend and colleague, Dr. Danny Richter, completed his 10 years as the head of our government affairs. And I just wanted a chance to say a couple things about him. So that's what's going to happen. What we'll start with is hearing from Hahrie Han. Hahrie Han is a professor at Johns Hopkins University. She teaches political science and is the inaugural director of the SNF Agora Institute, which strengthens global democracy through civic engagement and informed, inclusive dialogue. Her most recent book is Prisms of the People, Power and Organizing in the 21st Century. So Ricky, can you run that, please?
I am so very happy to have you back on the call with us and sharing the wonderful kinds of knowledge that you have about movement building and organizing. And I lots of our folks are familiar with your work, and for some they're new to it. So I'd love to just start with you talking about your work and what you study, and also this idea of transformational organizing that I think is so critical for us.
Sure. So first of all, it's always really good to have the opportunity to talk with you all. And so I'm really excited to have this chance to touch base. And so thank you for inviting me into the conversation. So just to give a little bit of background on me. So I'm a political scientist at Johns Hopkins University. A lot of what I do is study movement building and collective action. And I organize my work through a research lab called the P3 Lab, where we're trying to understand how you make the participation of ordinary people possible, probable, and powerful. Those are the 3 Ps. And so people have to be able to participate, they have to want to participate, and then it has to actually matter. And so a lot of the work that we do is partnering with grassroots organizations like CCL to put research around the work that you're doing to try to understand like what is more or less effective in making people's participation possible, probable, and powerful in different ways. And through some of the earlier research that we've done, one of the things that we developed is this distinction between the idea of transactional mobilizing and transformational organizing. And that project kind of really grew out of a funny paradox that we were seeing with a lot of grassroots organizations in the 21st century, which is this idea that on the one hand, it's like easier than ever before to get people involved, right? It seems like you can get hundreds of thousands of people like out into the streets with like a really good viral tweet or a powerful Facebook post or something like that. But on the other hand, we were talking with a lot of organizers who are on the front lines, and they were saying that they felt more powerless than ever before. And this is like 20 years ago, probably at this point. And so we wanted to understand, well, like, why is it? How is it that it can be, on the one hand, easier than ever before to get people involved? And on the other hand, the people who are doing the work on the front line feel like they're having less impact than they were in the past. And through that research is how we began to understand this distinction between transactional mobilizing and transformational organizing. So the way to think about it is that mobilizing is essentially a search process of trying to identify people who are already agitated and looking for ways to get involved around an issue and matching them with opportunities for engagement. So, for example, there are a lot of people out there who, after Trump got elected, were concerned and wanted to speak out against Trump. And so a woman in Hawaii created a Facebook post one night before she went to bed, saying that we should have a women's march, against Trump. And that post went viral. And then all of a sudden, the day after Trump got inaugurated in 2017, we had the Women's March, which at the time was the largest mass demonstration in American history, right? And it started with and that was because there were so many people, there was appetite and a desire for people wanting to be able to do something in response to that very contentious election that we had. So that's just mobilizing, right? They weren't necessarily moving people to a new place. They were just giving them an opportunity to get involved. And then it's almost like casting a net and capturing them. What we found is that the organizations that are the most effective combine that kind of mobilizing with what we call transformational organizing. And organizing is really about transforming the interests and the skills and the capacities of people who didn't necessarily think of themselves as people who want to get involved around an issue. It might be because they don't understand the issue and they don't think it's important. It might be because they think, gosh, doesn't seem like the weather is going in the directions that I want and I'm concerned about it, but what can I do, right? It might be because they feel like they're not really people who can make a difference. It might be because they actually disagree with you. Like, I don't know, there's many, many reasons why people don't want to get involved. And organizing is a process of engaging with people to understand and shape their interests and help them become architects of their own future. So help them develop the skills to engage with each other, to engage with people in positions of power, to engage with decision makers, to be able to, put their hands on the levers of change and work with others to help imagine and then create a vision of the world that they want. And so the most effective organizations that we have been studying really combine both of those, right? Mobilizing helps you get to scale. It helps you, get your name out into the media. It helps you kind of develop these sort of big events. But organizing is really kind of like the engine that drives a lot of the change work.
That is so helpful. And we've been doing so much mobilizing around the budget reconciliation process. So I think that rings home for folks. And when you talk about organizing being the engine, can you say some more then about what organizing looks like? As opposed to mobilizing?
Yeah. So there's a famous community organizer and one of my early mentors, Marshall Gans at Harvard University. And one of the things he talks about is that organizing begins with the process of identifying and developing leaders, then creating community around those leaders, and then drawing power from that community. Like, that's the way he sort of describes what organizing is, right? And so he's using the term leader, not in the conventional sense of, this is the person who is in charge of the organization, right? But a leader is someone who accepts the responsibility for enabling others to achieve shared purpose, right? And so part of what organizing is doing is kind of going into a community and trying to say, who are the people that have the respect of other people in the community? Who are the people that are connected to others, but that are concerned about what's going on? And how can I get to know them and understand what their concerns are, right? And so if I were to reach out to you, Madeline, it may not have been that the first thing you would say is, oh, I'm really concerned about climate, at a certain point in your life, perhaps. But I'd say, hey, I want to get to know you. I want to understand, what the concerns are. And I might say like, well, I've got these kids in high school and I just feel like they're entering into this world that feels so uncertain. I'm really concerned about this thing and that thing. And, a lot of people have these very concrete and personal concerns that they face in their own lives. And part of the process of organizing is beginning to sort of identify those interests, help people see the connection between their interests and other issues or other concerns that other people in their community might have, and then helping them develop the skills that they need to begin to work with each other to imagine and think about, well, what are solutions that we can create together to these problems? Who are the people that we need to be having conversations with to be able to help solve the problems that we've identified in our lives and in our communities, and so on. And that's really what that process of organizing is I think there's a process of like developing people's imagination, but also developing their skills, and then putting that together in a way that enables people to become, agents of change as opposed to just consumers of change that someone else is creating.
You used the phrase a moment ago, architects of their own future, which I'm going to steal and make my own and act like I was the one who came up with it. But, could you just say a little bit about how you get people to have a greater sense of agency, particularly in the political process? Because I think you've shown some graphs and presentations of people feeling like they have less agency.
So I think that's one of the biggest problems that we have in American politics right now, is that more and more people feel, there's data that shows people feel less efficacy. People feel like they're pawns in a game that someone else is controlling, and so, we've all heard all these exhortations to go out and vote and do things like that, which is of course really important. And I encourage everyone to go out and vote. But I think there are a lot of people who also feel like, gosh, if the only way that I can have any influence is every 2 to 4 years to go out and cast a ballot for a few candidates, it feels like a very emaciated way of having voice in my in my politics. And I think the idea of helping people develop agency is helping them see the ways in which they don't have to just accept the choices that someone else constructs. They don't have to just accept, feel like they're pawns in someone else's game, that they can actually begin to imagine and articulate a different set of choices that they want to put in front of our elected officials. And so, and because for most people, you can't do that alone, you have to work with others, that the first set of skills become, is really about learning how to work with others in your community. It could be a geographic community, it could be a digital community, it can be all different kinds of communities, to begin to figure out what is that thing that we want to create together, right? What is that thing that we all feel like we're willing to put some effort into creating? And then once you figure that out, then how do we go about creating that, right? Like, who are the people that we need to talk to make that a reality, right? If it's a carbon tax, then like, who are the people that can make the decisions around that? And how do I go and begin to have conversations with them in a way that makes them listen, and so these are all kind of skills that are learned over time. But first, people have to feel like they're actually able to be a part of that process in a way that I think right now most people don't feel like they can be.
That was a great question, Mark, and really, really, really interesting. I've been reflecting on my early years of starting chapters and going out into the community, and we tend to lead with a solution, which I think we rightly recognize that that's better than leading with anger or doom and gloom. We would lead with a solution and then look for people that resonated with that solution, and then I think begin the leadership and training and support process that you talked about. So what do you think about that, leading with a solution?
So there's two different things I would say to that. So the first thing is that my view is that when you think about the combination of mobilizing and organizing that we were talking about that make movements work, my sense on the mobilizing side is that anytime you're building a grassroots organization, you want to have lots of doors that enable people to walk through to become a part of your community, And so for a lot of people who are overwhelmed by the sense of doom that exists around climate in particular, I think having a solution, having someone talk to you and lead with a solution is a really powerful and exciting opportunity. But I think so I think it's a smart way to bring people in. But as an organization, I think you want to have lots of other ways too. Like in I've done a lot of work with evangelical megachurches. I think I've mentioned this to you in the past. And one of the things that I really learned from those megachurches, and these are churches that get like 30,000 people together every Sunday, which is just a scale that's very different from any political organization that exists in America. And they have a real ethos of this idea that belonging comes before belief. So whether or not you believe in God, whether or not you believe in our God, whether or not you're evangelical, like all these kind of things, like you are a part of our community. Like they just welcome everyone in with this kind of sense of radical hospitality. And to me, that's the idea of having lots of doors open through which people can come and become and feel like they belong in your community. And then what the churches sort of argue is that they're not trying to manipulate or hoodwink people. It's not like they're shy about the fact that they're a church, right? They're not hiding that from anybody. But they're saying like, look, even if you're an atheist, you're welcome to be a part of our community. Now we believe in God, we believe in, this set of things, and we're going to try to convince you that, to come and believe in our God, but you're still welcome part of our community, even if you don't agree with us, And so that's the kind of ethos that underlies the kind of belonging comes before belief. And I think there's something really powerful to that, what the data shows is that often people's beliefs evolve as a function of their sense of belonging in a community. And that's true not only in faith-based communities, but also in political organizations as well. So it's a long way of saying that I think that leading with a solution is great, but I think the kind of bigger challenge for the organization is how can we create this sense of belonging that allows people to kind of enter into the organization through lots of different kinds of doorways.
Such a powerful phrase, radical hospitality.
Yeah.
One of the needles that we try to thread is how do we make this a safe place for conservatives to participate? At the same time, how do we make it a safe place for people who are in marginalized communities? And those things seem at odds with each other, but we're committed to solving that. And I don't think we have. Do you, Madeline?
Well, it's a work in progress.
It's a work in progress, but do you have any advice or insight on that? I love the term. I think we're going to adopt this notion of radical hospitality. I think it's something that we've tried to do as an organization, but I think naming it that particular way even gives it more power.
Yeah. So I have a couple thoughts about this question of like, how do you, and one of this is sort of like academic term that I would put on what you're saying is like, how do you build kind of bridging capital and not just bonding capital, And so in the literature on social capital, there's a kind of distinction that scholars make between bridging capital and bonding capital. And so bonding capital is creating thick bonds and ties between people who are like you. And bridging capital is about creating those kind of ties with people who are not like you, And movements, in order to get to scale, have to have bridging capital just by definition, right? Because no matter how you define yourself, at some point you will have to bridge beyond that sort of initial demographic, whatever it is, or geographic group, or whatever you want to call it, And so the challenge of how you create bridging capital is particularly challenging in this political moment that we're in because of high rates of polarization, because of the ways in which political identities have come to become such powerful forces in our politics and so on. So I think creating that bridging capital is even harder now than it may have been, 30 years ago or something like that. And the thing that I will say is, so there's no formula for creating it. I think in the end, it comes down to having authentic relationships, so it's really hard to create bridging capital in the abstract, to sort of say, hey, like we welcome everybody. And lots of people say that, but then when actual people who are different than you come into the organization, there's not actually that sense of, so in the end, it comes down to what is the experience that people have and the authenticity of the relationship they create. But one thing that I will say that I've seen organizations that have been more successful at doing this than others is there's a way in which the kind of structural units that they create enable the cultivation of bridging capital when you have groups that have different levels of power in society in the ways that you were describing. And the way to think about that is there's one organization I worked with that sort of uses this metaphor of the house, which is the idea, or like an apartment building, sorry, it's better is what they're saying, is that like in an apartment building, we all have our own apartments and we take care of our apartment and that's our responsibility. But then we also have a lobby and we have like a courtyard and we have the elevator and we have these other spaces that are shared that we all have to take care of together. And very often in communities where you have groups that come in with different levels of power, of marginalization, of so on and so forth, you want to kind of create that apartment building where, you know, there is space for women to bond with other women, for, you know, people from lower socioeconomic backgrounds to have their own apartment with people from a lower, or conservatives to bond with other conservatives. Like they need that space to kind of connect with each other, to create the kind of bonding capital that's important for them to feel like they can bring their whole selves and the sense of their identity into the work. But then, you know, when you live in an apartment building, you don't have just your apartment. You also have the lobby, you have the community room, you have the courtyard that you all take care of together. And how do you create the kind of structural units within the organization that enable both that bonding and those bridging spaces to emerge? And so I think that in the organizations I've seen that are most successful at doing that, they use different kind of structural units to enable that. And so one example that I'll give, just because we were talking about this just a minute ago, is so in these evangelical megachurches, what's one of these structural units that's very common in churches is what's called small groups. And so these are churches that, you know, they have 30,000 people that come together every weekend. And so obviously there's no way that I'm going to know like all 29,000 other, you know, congregants that are in my community. And so the vast majority of people who are part of these churches are also part of a small group. And a small group could be organized around, you know, people without kids who live on the West Side, people who want to play tennis on Saturdays, people who want to do a Bible study, you know, people who just retired. Like, I don't know, there's like any range of different things that you can imagine that would bring people together. And they're small groups of like maybe 8 to 10 to 15 kind of people. And they're self-governing, self-organized groups. So there's not like a staff member who runs it, but they run their own Bible study, or they run their own, you know, and like there might be a guide that helps them or something like that. But what that means is that they have a space where they can choose who the other people are that they want to be with. It's self-governing so that they can kind of, you know, anyone who's a part of it has voice in shaping what direction it goes. And so in moments when, you know, in some of the research that I've done, in moments when people are upset with something that the bigger church did, let's say, you know, they could sort of say like, forget it, I'm out of here. Like this church doesn't stand for what I believe in, but it's a small group that keeps them there, because a small group is a place where they have real relationships with people that they really care about. But then also they might say, hey, I disagree with this thing that the pastor said on Sunday, but in my small group, here's a group of people that I feel like I can really, you know, that really understand where I'm coming from, and that, you know, in some cases really agree with me, in some cases don't really agree with me, but at least like I can have this like authentic, deep, you know, relationship and conversation with about this issue that we're all grappling with. And so having those kind of structural units where people feel like they're really shaping the direction of that unit is really important in enabling that kind of bridging capital to emerge. That was a really long answer. I'm really sorry.
I can relate to that in terms of my CCL chapter, and I can relate to that in terms of my own church experience, where the 1115 choir is my small group, and the sense of belonging is very strong there, and that pulls me through at times when I'm not so happy with the hierarchy.
Yep. And that's a very common kind of thing that we see not only in church faith-based communities, but also in other kind of communities. But very often we don't see that in the kind of grassroots or political organizations that, you know, that exist otherwise.
Yeah. We could go this way a long way, but I want to talk about the pandemic. Can we talk about the pandemic a little bit?
Yeah.
So we, you know, it's been 2.5 years, and we've done an amazing job, I believe, of using Zoom and connecting that way, and still it's rough, you know, and it's, you know, that relational sense of belonging is so much harder to do on Zoom. So I'm just curious what you've seen about the pandemic's effect on this kind of transformational organizing, and who's been most successful with it and how. And and then of course there's looking forward. Could you predict the future for us?
I wish I could. I mean, I will say, I think there's been like huge opportunity that's been created because people, now it's like, think of the numbers of people that are comfortable getting on a Zoom meeting, that far exceeds the numbers of people that are comfortable doing that prior to the pandemic. And so that enables us to reach people that we weren't able to reach before. But I think that it's also true that what we're seeing is that a lot of, there's a couple trends that are kind of moving in parallel to each other that it's hard to predict how they're going to shake out. So on the one hand, people have a greater comfort with the technology, and that's enabled like greater reach in the ways that we talked about. On the other hand, people are starting to feel fatigue with the technology, and so it's hard to know how those two, the kind of convenience factor that arises with the technology relative to the sort of Zoom fatigue that people have, like how those patterns are going to run in parallel to each other. And I think, this is, potentially like not a very creative answer, but I will say, the patterns that we're seeing among grassroots organizations is not that different than the patterns that we're seeing before, is that the organizations that did deep work prior to the pandemic are continuing to do deep work with technology, during the pandemic. And the organizations that struggled with it before are still considered struggling with it after, and so I think my kind of gut instinct around this, but again, it's still hard to know exactly where the data is going to go, is that it's not so much that technology that governs the ability of organizations to do the kind of transformational organizing that we're talking about, but it's really more a sense of their own commitment to it and their willingness to figure it out. The Zoom format does create different challenges that in-person formats did not, but it's also true in reverse. In-person formats create a different kind of set of challenges that the Zoom format mitigates. And so you always have those challenges. And I think it's really a question of, do you want to do the work that's deep or shallow? And if you want to do the work that's deep, then how do you make best use of whatever format you have before you?
And who do you have examples of people succeeding really well at the deep work?
You mean during the pandemic and over Zoom?
Yeah, and coming out of it.
And coming out of it.
I'm optimistically figuring we're coming out of it. We are well more than halfway out of it. Let's go out on a limb there.
Yeah, I mean, I think so I think there's a lot of organizations that I don't necessarily know. I think a lot of churches have been, I feel like we have this theme, but just because we started talking about it now, it's like on my mind. But I think there have been a lot of churches that really have been really creative with how they've used some combination of both online and offline formats to engage their community through the pandemic and now coming out of it. Mm-hmm. I think, there's a digital first organization, the largest Black-led digital first organization in the country is called Color of Change. And they have, they are a digital first organization, but they also have like offline components. And I think they've been really thoughtful throughout the pandemic and now, and thinking about how they combine the online offline experience for people to enable them to engage in a range of different ways. And so I think there are examples of organizations that are being really creative with that work and able to kind of continue to fulfill their mission.
Hahrie, could you just take a minute to say a little bit about your most recent book? Because I know that people are just going to absorb every single minute of this call, but are going to want ways of getting more.
Yeah, so two of my colleagues, Elizabeth McKenna and Michelle Oyakawa, and I had a book that came out last year. It's called Prisms of the People. And what we were doing in that book is we were really trying to study, 6 organizations that have basically broken the trend that we were talking about before, which is that so often nowadays you see this gap between the ability of organizations to gather people together for action and then their ability to actually have an impact. And we wanted to sort of say, what if we were to study the outliers, and there's all this data that supports that there's like a general trend around that, So we said, what if we were able to study the outliers and say, let's look at the organizations that actually were able to break through. Are there any commonalities across them? And then the null hypothesis in a way is that there are no commonalities, right? That they all were lucky in some way, that they're all idiosyncratic in some way. But we found that there actually were commonalities that had to do with the ways in which they organize themselves for transformational organizing, the ways that they invested in a set of strategic capacities that enable them to navigate the inevitable kind of political uncertainties that would come their way. And so that idea of investing in strategic capacity to navigate political uncertainty is part of how we unpack in the book through these case studies.
Wow. Okay, I'm reading it. Hahrie, I just, it's always so inspiring when we talk to you, and you seem so passionate about your work. What's the origin of that passion? What drives you to push yourself in such interesting ways in your work?
It's interesting. So I grew up in Texas. I was a daughter of Korean immigrants, and I grew up in a family that was very apolitical. So like politics was not something I thought about or talked about at the dinner table. It wasn't something that I thought that I would ever be interested in. And I got involved in student organizing in college, and that's what sort of opened my eyes to this world of politics. But I think what really spoke to me when I first had that experience in college was this idea that there is a gap between the world as it is and the world as I think it should be, and I experienced that as a kid. And as a kid, I just felt like, well, it's just sort of the way things are, and I just have to put up with it. But then having the experience of being part of an effort with other people to try to change and realize the world that we wanted is, I think once you have that experience, it's really hard to walk away from it. There's just a real kind of joy and power and effervescence in it that I haven't seen in other places. And so that's what really got me interested in trying to understand and make sense of and study it in a way that hopefully is able to kind of support other organizations and people who are doing that work to strengthen their practice.
Madeline, we're almost out of time. Is there anything else that you wanted to make sure we got to in this session?
This has been great. I'm just looking ahead and interested in any advice on organizing or strategy that you might have from your background and experience as we navigate having had a victory in Congress, a significant victory that we worked long and hard for. And sometimes political leaders decide, okay, we're done with that. We've done it, and how to keep the appetite going forward and continue to build that power that it's going to take to push Congress to take the next steps and the next steps that are before us, because that's our next challenge.
Yeah. So I will say, I do think this is a really, it's a both pivotal and potentially precarious moment for the organization, because the data does show that people are more driven naturally by a sense of threat than a sense of opportunity, and so when people feel like there's a sense of threat, it drives all this instinctive kind of mobilizing action that we're talking about. And when people feel like, oh, well, that problem's been taken care of, then it becomes harder to kind of get people engaged or keep people engaged. And so I think there is a real moment for the organization to be able to think about how can it capitalize on this opportunity. The data also shows on the policymaking side that when you have these moments of opportunity, they can build on each other if you can keep the momentum up, and so the question is, how does CCL as an organization do that when there might be people who are kind of thinking, oh, well, we've gotten this big victory, we can kind of like take a breath for a little while. And I think again, there's not a formulaic answer to this. I think in my experience, a lot of it kind of gets back to this question that I think we've talked about in some of our previous conversations, which is, organizations that start with this question of who are my people versus what is my issue are very different kinds of organizations. And when you have a clear sense of who your people are and what their needs are, then everything builds from there, And so in a sense, it feels like, I think there is this real moment of victory that should be celebrated. But at the same time, we know that your people, the people who are part of this organization, there still is a real gap between where we are and where we need to be, and so how can you engage people in a process that articulates that and then creates a plan moving forward that people feel bought into?
So participation in articulating that plan and having a plan is what I think I took away from that.
Yeah, I think, engaging people and making the and feeling like they're helping to develop that next phase of strategy, I think is really important.
Thank you. Any last questions from you, Mark?
No, I'm just blown away again. Thank you so much, Hahrie.
Always a joy to talk.
Yeah, so lucky to have you as a resource and as an ally.
Yeah.
Well, it's really fun for me too. So thank you for inviting me and giving me this opportunity.
June of 2009 was CCL's first ever lobby day. It was Marshall Saunders, our founder, Danny Richter, who at that point was a grad student at Scripps, and me. The House of Representatives was debating a 1,400-page, what we thought was overly complicated cap and trade bill called Waxman-Markey. We thought we had a far better, simpler, more effective solution, which was a revenue-neutral carbon tax. So we had prepared our talking points. We had been told that one of the ways to be effective in meeting with members of Congress was to have a story. So the story we selected was why Danny chose to be a climate scientist over a medical doctor. So we had meetings set up for 2 days. We had meetings scheduled with Republicans and Democrats. We were confident. We felt we were prepared. We went on the Hill and we were terrible. However, there was one meeting where a member of Congress said, I don't understand this bill and I can't find anybody who can explain it to me. And if you come back to my office tomorrow, I will bring 3 or 4 members of Congress out from the floor at a time, and you can explain why your solution is better than the one we're discussing. So that evening, we were sitting on a bench outside the Cannon office building, and I said to Danny and Marshall, wow, look what 3 sorry asses just did. And Marshall said, yeah, 3 sorry asses trying to save the planet. Now, we did not know till a lot later that that night, several members of the Obama cabinet contacted that member of Congress, told him that he was not going to be pulling out people to meet with us. And in fact, he was going to be voting for Waxman-Markey. So we didn't find out till much later, but nevertheless, we decided to keep the name. At that point, as I said, Danny was a grad student at Scripps Institution of Oceanography. And we used to send him information where we couldn't get our hands around issues. And he would bring something back really quick that made it understandable and clear. So we decided when Danny finished his PhD, we would offer him a job. So in fact, he finished his PhD, we offered him a job, he came to work for us. I never asked or implied to Danny that he should go to DC. That was his own choice. He believed that he needed to shut up shop in DC. His wife was still working on her PhD, so that meant they would be living separately for a year. I want to fast forward now a decade later, and that group of not very prepared people is now, Danny's built up the juggernaut of an organization where when members of the House and Senate want to get climate bills passed, we're who they come to. It's a huge transformation, and I'm excited about whatever is next for Danny. There's one thing I want to point to in particular, though. We used to, if you've ever come to DC, during the lobby prep session that Danny would lead, those sessions were always really smart, really insightful, usually funny, sometimes including hilarious analogies that had to do with surfing and boogers that somehow made sense in the context of carbon pricing. But in the middle of those sessions, it wasn't unusual for Danny to ask 1,000 people to stand up and dance to something like Twist and Shout. And then everybody sit down and you would hear a dispassionate, next question, please. So my hope is that for whatever is next for Danny, it allows him to express his incredible brilliance, his sense of humor, and that moxie that, unlike, I don't think anybody else from any government affairs department would ask people to stand up and dance in the middle of the most important session we were going to do of our conference. So Danny is the last 2 remaining members of the Sorry Ass Club. I hope that the next 13 years of our friendship and collaboration is as fun and productive as the last 13 years. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Citizens Climate Lobby's training program. You can tune into more episodes anywhere podcasts are available. Inspired by what you heard today? Join Citizens Climate Lobby to advocate for bipartisan climate solutions. Go to community.citizensclimate.org to find more trainings, resources, your local chapter, national action teams, discussion forums, and more. Be sure to like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter and Instagram @CitizensClimate. We also invite all of our listeners to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more inspiration.
Like what you hear? Recommend us to your friends and make sure to give us a 5-star rating.
It helps us show up on other listeners' feeds. Feel free to pass on any suggestions for future episodes in the comments as well. And together, we are creating the political will for a livable world.